We're here with the Reentry team from Nehemiah, talking about some of the latest news on prison conditions in Wisconsin during the COVID-19 pandemic and what the experiences are for those that are currently incarcerated or those that are formerly incarcerated or maybe until recently. And there's been a lot of different information out in the news. So we just kind of wanted to talk through what this might actually look like for those people going through this, people that maybe work in the prisons, are inmates in the prisons, all those different factors. So about a week ago, from when we're recording this, WKOW ABC reported that an inmate at a Dane County jail had hid COVID-19 symptoms and infected 32 others who have now been tested positive. So another staff person who wasn't able to join us today, Dr. Karen Reese, had commented to us that maybe there's more that could be said or more responsibility that the prisons could have taken instead of kind of putting this on an inmate for spreading the infection. So I didn't know what you all kind of thought about that situation and when you heard that news.
With the conversations that I've had with some of the gentlemen that are currently incarcerated, a lot of the same answers come about where I said, where are you getting your information regarding COVID? A lot of them have memos that come down from the DOC. A lot of them can read the news articles and things like that, but really they are inside. So they're relying on the information that's being given to them, which is often controlled by DOC. So my personal opinion is that when the DOC speaks on persons in our care, that does define that it is under their care. So if someone is in fact having COVID symptoms, I agree with Karen. I don't feel like that should be placed as a blame on that particular inmate as far as having hid it, because realistically, if they're given the proper notification as to what the symptoms are, if they're doing the testing as if they're saying that they are doing based on the DOC reports on their website, if they were actually going through with the precautions that needed to be, that in fact wouldn't be hidden. So personally, I'm feeling like something's missing with that, and I don't feel like that personal individual should be harboring all of that blame for having, and especially with the spread, because we knew already if one person gets it, what the spread is going to be. So I feel like that's in poor taste to try to blame it on one individual.
I would just echo some of the same things that Rebecca said. I mean, I find it interesting that, someone can come in and infect a multitude of people and nobody has no rhyme or reason to how is this taking place, which, ultimately that in itself speaks volumes about what's being done and not being done. I think I build my case based on the evidence that's brought before me. And if you say you're doing something and something like this happens, well, it would be the contrary, actually. And so I think on their end, making sure that the individuals that's in there, they're safe, that they're protected, and making sure that the staff in there are protected as well. But, if you're going to bring people into the jail or bring people in the prison, I think somehow or another there needs to be some type of testing that's taking place so that you don't have a multitude of people infected with, COV.
Exactly. Yeah. And I definitely agree with the both of you. It's one, for the blame to be put just on that one individual, similar to what Rebecca had mentioned as far as just saying, one, how many people actually know whether or not, what are those symptoms, right? And so, and are definitely remembering what those symptoms are from the day-to-day basis, but then also, who knows what that person, where their mind frame was at, even when they went in. So, yeah. and why are people not being tested in the beginning? And of course, it's a few days before they can actually find out if they're positive or negative. I think there are some rapid tests that are also being provided as well. So, so when you have a mix of all of that, why wasn't any of that stuff done in the beginning? Yes, it may, you know what I mean? Because if someone's I'm just thinking, if someone's homeless their main thought is, what am I going to eat tonight? What of, you know, they may, if they're this may be a feeling that I've always had, is not necessarily connecting it to COVID. So the blame definitely should not be on those individuals. But at the same time, I think the other part of it is we also have to make sure that, or they, should I say, have to make sure that people are aware from beginning to end, and they're having those conversations. There should be, like, the same thing how they do a detox. There should be a moment, maybe the person can go into like a detox area until the next days, until they find out whether or not a person is tested positive. So by looking at all of those, I mean, there's ways of being able to do that to make sure the infection is not spread. But also, I think one of the other parts of it, it doesn't necessarily mean that that individual brought it in. It could also, I mean, you have sheriff's departments that have families that have other I mean, you know, there's different connections. How serious are those people that are actually, you know, coming in and out of the prison or Dane County Jail? Who are they interacting with? So,
Yeah.
I mean, it's a big ripple effect all the way around the board. We have to make sure that people are getting tested, but then also that it's not just the inmates. It's not just the inmates. It's also that there needs to be a regular rapid test that is being available to also to the guards as well.
Yeah, I would concur with that. I think one of the things that has happened that's a common theme, we use the word accountability, and I feel like we only use it one-sided.
Mm-hmm.
We use it for the individuals who have been incarcerated. If you committed a crime, when you go to court, you have to be held accountable. The police use words like accountability, all of those different things. And I'm not against that. I think what happens, though, on the flip side is our system is, and the people who are administrating these things and saying these things are not being held accountable. We hear in media how, you know, they're cutting back on, you know, the decrease in prison, the decrease in jail. We hear those things, but when we actually do the research, come to find out these things are not actually happening.
Mm-hmm.
And I think the same principle would apply with COVID as well.
Mm-hmm.
You can't say that we have this under control and then you have 30 to 40 people infected.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
That's you don't have that under control.
Mm-hmm.
And actually, because you don't have it under control, that's why the accountability is so important on all capacities, not just for the individuals who potentially might have committed a crime or not, but also for the officers, for you have doctors coming in there, you have social workers coming in there, and all of those people are in and out. They probably have kids, so on and so forth. And again, they can bring that in there. And I just think that until we can get accountability all the way around the board and not just on one side and not the other, I think you'll have epidemics like this where individuals fall through the cracks and the crevices because we have not made a sound decision to make sure that not only are people saying it, but they're actually doing it.
Right, right.
And so, go ahead.
No, and I think you definitely hit it on the head with that. I think it's really one of those things that, you know, it's easier. I mean, if we're being honest all the way around the board, right? So it's easier to point the finger outward. You know what I mean? Who wants to point the finger at themselves when they're saying, okay, hey, it's this epidemic and no one really knows how to deal with it or or it never have actually went through this process before. And honestly, if we're, you have to also look at it, and for some of them, there's some that probably don't necessarily even believe it, right?
Yeah.
You know what I mean? I mean, look at what happened at the state capitol, right? So all of those things you have to kind of bring into effect. They're people also, regardless of what title that they may have. They're still people. So whatever they still come with their own belief systems and so on and so
Absolutely.
forth. So all of that
Absolutely.
stuff you got to throw all of that in there, regardless of what they may say the protocol and all those things that are being used. That's also just another factor that unless you have to make it law, this is what has to happen. If you're going to work here, this is what has to happen. And there's some other self-checks, people that are coming in and saying, all right, let me make sure you have your gloves on. Let me make sure you're wearing protective gear. Let me make sure da-da-da-da-da. If those things are not happening on a regular basis, not just, okay, hey, we just did it. We did our one check today. We have to do those checks all throughout that shift. You're going to always end up having some, there's going to always be some, I think some people don't feel there's going to be wiggle room. And obviously, just when we look at the deaths and the death total and the people who have been affected by it, there is no space for wiggle room. Period. If we're really trying to prevent the spread.
I like what you said, and with the accountability, I think that it's bottom line when it really gets down to it is pandemic or no pandemic. If you look at the mission statement of the Department of Corrections, and it states that these people are under our care, and there's a mission to not only rehabilitate but also, get them back into the community. That is the end result. It isn't a warehouse. It isn't a storage facility. These people do have human rights, and that is law. And like you said, maybe there should be a law with. Unfortunately, the laws that you're speaking of are directly related to pandemic, and I agree with all of them. And I think what we're overlooking is the fact that the laws that are already in place to keep human dignity and keep human rights intact are already being overlooked. So the laws that are there is saying that 7 by 10 is the largest size that you can have, or the smallest size available for a 2-person cell. Anything smaller than that, it's not allowed. That's law. All of these bars that are open, they have a capacity. There's a limit. Those are laws, and they're enforced. But why is it that we're not enforcing these laws on the inside? All of our prisons are basically, the majority of our prisons here in Wisconsin are over capacity already. And then you add the pandemic to it. So what I would like to see happen is we need to first and foremost get back to that human dignity and that human rights aspect of getting those numbers where our law has already stated that maximum that it can be, because there's absolutely no way that we can address the social distancing as it sits right now. And then to turn around and blame someone on the inside for contracting something that came from the outside is, it's frustrating to say the least, because we do have, it is within the governor's control to make these decisions without legislative changes. So we don't have to go to court. We don't have to petition. We don't have to. What we do have to do is get our lawmakers or our governor, to use the authority to actually make those change. Now, one of the articles that was recently posted in the media had said something about in the beginning of Governor Evers' campaign that he was planning on reducing the population. But then once the pandemic hit, he said, I'm not going to use my power or my stature to make a mass release. However, what's being done is mass incarceration. So either way you look at it, either you're not going to do it one way or you're not going to do the other. Both things right now are the wrong choice.
Right.
And bottom line is we need to see some of these people that have already been entrusted to work in the community on work release. They need to have other options other than behind the walls confinement, which we can do.
Yeah, and, definitely agree with you, and just kind of really trying to just see, I think, how things are going to be approached, because even though the state is opening up and things of that nature, but at the same time, what are we going to do going forward, right? I mean, regardless if there is a dip, there's still not in cases, but it's still there. So, what treatment is being available. And then honestly, I mean, there's enough people that are afraid of being able to take the treatment because, I mean, there's some historical stuff behind that. We talk about airmen and, and things of that nature. But then also, you're going to try something that, why would I try something that has never been necessarily tested for a long period of time? So people feeling as though, hey, I may be a guinea pig. This is just me just putting these things out there. So, and you can only imagine inside the prison what people are thinking and things of that nature, because you're already in an environment where there is no trust, right? So prison or Dane County Jail. So, I mean, I think right now we really do have to make sure that people, one, are aware of what the symptoms are, and I'll just throw this out there as well, because even though when you're aware of the symptoms, but there are a lot of people who have had it that they have not had any symptoms and have passed. So these are all things that we have to take in consideration as well. So I don't know. I think, again, it is one of those things where we have to be able to at least have random testing and things of that nature to be able to prevent the spread. And to be able to, we need to have more communication, whether if it's through social media, if it's through the different news outlets that are coming from officials who actually know what the heck they're talking about. That was not my chosen word. Something else almost came out, right? So I'm just being honest, right? So because it's just too much. It's too much of the unknown, and because there's so much unknown,
we need to see change.
Right.
Now we can present numbers and we can present testing and we can present this, but the bottom line remains: we are overcrowded without a pandemic, period.
Right. Which is true, which is all true. But at the same time, you still have to. There's still a fear. All this stuff you have to be able to put in there, and then the CDC, public health, and all these other folks need to be able to put those things out there.
Right.
So because when we talk about trauma, we have all these other additional talks. Those things are out there, and we know that they're there. But I don't feel like the public are necessarily talking about it as much as they need to. And then so we're all on the same page. We all are trying to figure out different ways of being able to survive the right way, right? So.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, go ahead.
Oh, I think that's good. I think part of why we want to have these conversations and hear from you is because some people may not understand why we are giving so much attention to those that are currently incarcerated or formerly incarcerated, because they may feel like, oh, they're kind of the people we don't see in society as much, or when they come out of prison, are they productive citizens and things like that. And we're trying to say with Nehemiah and through our reentry services that we're trying to help people go through that process the best they can. And yes, the goal is always to have people to being productive citizens, and also the clarity of, a lot of the people being released, or that I think Anthony and Aaron, you guys talk about, are sort of just in jail because they violated their terms of release or something like that. So they're not necessarily there because they're committing these new crimes. It's much more complicated than that. And of course, we want people, if they have committed crimes, to be held accountable for those in the right way, right? In a fair and just way. We're not saying that. We're just saying it's a lot more complicated than people normally think. So I guess what I'm saying is we're trying to shed light on, it's great that this new Cap Times article came out in Madison and for the state to give us some more information, but we're saying this is a place of a lot of fear and lack of control. A lot of us that are staying at home, we still have a lot of control over our lives, right? And who we see. And so these are people that we expect will return to society and rejoin us and be productive and have jobs. So we want to make sure that they're safe as well. And that maybe if they don't need to be there right now, just because it's a violation of their release or something, not that they committed another crime, do they really need to be in this dangerous situation for their health because of that? And I know recently there was another article in the news about a mother that was trying to have her son released to home care temporarily because he has been tested positive and seen symptoms. And again, I think the concern is, in that environment, are the facilities accountable for the health and the safety that they should be providing to those people? Or is this going to be essentially a death sentence for a crime that, didn't need that? So I think that's why we want to be talking about this. And one thing I did want to bring up for you all, what have you seen? What have you heard in your experience before this and maybe after? What people kind of go through when they are released from prison? Because we are seeing more people sort of released during this time. Although I think, as we've said, we'd like to see the state and counties held to more accountability for what they said they're going to do. But could you kind of take us through that experience of what people deal with as far as housing, jobs, maybe homelessness, what they're dealing with?
I mean, I guess I can touch on that as well. As far as, so, I mean, one, that there's an overall fear, right? There's an overall fear from when someone tells an employer or even tells a landlord, say, hey, I just came home from prison. This is, trying to explain their story as they're trying to do things differently in their lives. This is again, it's a fear because there is so much of the unknown. There are people who the landlords. There's an unknown there. There's employers. There's so much unknown there, and not to even really get into, I mean, I guess we can, as far as the fact that where some of our entry level positions are not available right now because of the simple shift of I can't just come out and just go and start at a McDonald's or whatnot, or even some warehouses are still in this fear. So these are just some of the things that even have been talked about among employers, among landlords, and being able to see what that looks like to be able to and how we're navigating it. Yeah, I think that's probably from my view. I think that's really that kind of hits it for me, because really, because we have doctors who we're connected to that we can ask and say, hey, can you explain, give this either HR director or this HR director or this landlord, give them, if they have any questions, can you give them a different type of explanation, or is there other materials that we can probably share with them, just to be able to, or as they educate us, we can educate someone else. So those are all the things that what we can do on our end. But then also, because again, there's not enough stuff that's out there in the community to be able to give to give to people, period. Rebecca, did you have anything to add to that?
I mean, yeah, I think it's everything that you said, I agree with. There's always going to be that challenge because it's a bias, it's a
Mm-hmm.
stigma to carry around. So I think that, you know, there's a gap that is a really difficult gap to cross, from what I've seen as far as having to prove yourself. You've already received your sentence if you in fact did get a guilty verdict or whatever they decided, if you were guilty or if you weren't, whatever. You received your sentence, you've served the time as per the courts, etc., and you come out. You would think at that point you would be able to at least build and move forward and say, hey, I made a mistake, I sat this time, I did this as per the courts, now it's time for me to get back to my life. However, I feel like that's like a backpack that you're just going to keep wearing.
Mm-hmm.
And that's where it really gets difficult, because not only are the people who are quote unquote free right now, who have never served time, struggling. Some places are
Right.
still closed. There's offices they can't get to. It's harder to get
Mm-hmm.
a dentist visit, whatever. Everybody's suffering kind of right now. But then you add on top of that the restrictions that you faced after sitting for how many years, or even if it's just for the past year, maybe somebody hasn't
Mm-hmm.
done a long time. It's so much has changed even in the past 6 months that you just, everyone's got new challenges. So I think, like you said, I agree with everything that you did say, but I do think that a little bit of compassion, understanding that
Mm-hmm.
once you've lost that chunk of your life, and served and paid your dues, so to speak, I think that there is some sort of ethical response that the rest of us should be able to provide to people to say, hey, you're moving forward now. But for
Mm-hmm.
some reason, that's such a hard thing for people to grasp onto.
Right. I mean, it basically just added an extra layer, and and honestly, even kind of because I feel like our system and our community in some sense supports it even more to say, oh no, we don't want this person in our building because of, right, and that's saying that landlords or employers have to be able to explain that. But those, again, we're adding those extra fears because there's not enough information that is not only put out there. There's not enough information that's given to people on a regular basis. Period.
Right.
So we're still losing the grandmother or the other or parent that who's typically relying on news articles or whatever the case may be, or relying on TV, or we're still losing people all at the same time because we're not putting out enough information. So which is huge, and not to say that a lot of people that agencies are not doing some, but we're not giving out enough. I'm talking about old school, knock on the door, blah blah blah. Here's a packet. Let me explain to you. This is what this COVID is all about. This is, you know what I mean. I think that's the approach that we have to take, and we haven't. We have not quite yet did it that way. To be able to really spread the word. Aaron, did you have anything you want to add? I know you're having some phone difficulties.
Yeah. I don't know what's going on with this. Why I keep kicking in and kicking out. But I just want to say, based on my own personal experience with being incarcerated, it's always two sides to every story, and I think that the community only sees one side. They don't get a chance to exactly what goes on, what happens to individuals, the impact of incarceration, all of those different things. And I think it's for everyone to really take a look at like how vulnerable these individuals are, and how do we best serve them and keep them safe. All of these different mission statements and all of these statements that's, on people's website, we're here to serve and keep people safe and all of those different things. I think this is the time where people need to be held accountable to do just those things for these individuals, because they're very vulnerable. They don't have a clue of what's going on. They don't have a clue of the severity of COVID. Like, they don't know none of this stuff. And so I think it's on our end, it's our obligation to make sure not only do they have the information, but they also have the resources, the things that they need to be safe. And I think whatever door we need to knock on to make sure that happens, and it's not just being said, but it's actually being done, we need to do just that, because it is a epidemic, and people should be afraid. That's the truth, because we don't know exactly how this all came about. We hear all the different reasons. It could have came from China, whatever the case may be. But what we do know for sure is people are dying from this, and that's very real. And so I think it's our obligation to make sure that these individuals are safe, that they are sound, that our communities are safe. And for those who don't need to be in there, we need to be coming up with ways in which we can get them up out of there. Because we know beyond a shadow of a doubt, it's still overcrowding in prison. And so any type of social distancing, you can count that out. That's not happening.
Yeah.
Because of the overcrowdedness. And that's in jail and in prison, I'm sure of it. And I think it ain't until we start to have these kind of conversations. This is not about bashing the DOC or bashing the sheriffs. It's not about bashing anybody, but it's really about, okay, if you are who you say you are, then these individuals can come up out of prison. What's the issue?
Mm-hmm.
What's the issue? Let's start to make some of this stuff a reality, and let's start to make it real so that people can see that this is happening. And I think the flip side is making sure that, you know, organizations like ourselves and other organizations have the resource to be able to, whether it be house these individuals, but just making sure that transition is safe and sound again, so that people are coming back into the community with the right type of resources, the right type of people that's walking with them through this whole journey. Because this is not a, you know, one day fly by night, wham bam, thank you, ma'am. No, this is a process.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And so we want to make the adjustment. We want to make it as safe and as sound as possible, and make the most out of these things.
Mm-hmm. I definitely agree.
Yeah, that's really well said, Aaron. So I think what we can kind of do and take from this, as individuals that might be listening, is that we can really hold our agencies accountable for what's going on, for what they said, whether it's the governor who committed to reducing a population by 50%. And, you know, right now, Cap Times reported we've only reduced the prisons by 5%, the state prisons at this time, which were already overcrowded. So that means they remain overcrowded even with that amount of
You got
releases,
that right.
Yeah.
right? So and other states are showing good results by doing a lot more releases to reduce that, to allow for social distancing in the prisons, as much as keep people safe and fair and just. So we can hold our counties and state accountable for those things, and we can speak up about that. Like Aaron said, we can support efforts of organizations and people like Nehemiah that are doing the work to help people. We do what's called wraparound services. So we offer housing for people coming out of prison, helping them find jobs, helping support them through all the sort of trauma and issues that they might have dealt with that caused some of these points in their life. So we try to offer all of those things, and especially during this time that becomes more difficult during the pandemic. So we want to be able to even provide food for people coming out of housing, which we've been doing. So you can also go to the Nehemiah website and actually hear voices of current inmates about their experiences, what it's like to be in prison and trying to do the social distancing thing, the fears that they might have of dealing with this. So we're doing our best to get that information out as well. And also just call for, like Anthony was saying, we need to hear more transparent news and information about conditions and what people are going through. So let's keep up with that, and we'll do our best to continue to update you. So thank all of you for sharing what's going on and what you're hearing and seeing, what you're thinking.